I'll explain in this short video my main tips to achieve the perfect continuous curvilinear capsulorhexis. First point, which is very important, is how you rest the rhexis forceps over the superior incision's lead. This is the perfect position of the forceps pointing down towards the anterior capsule and resting on the superior lead of the incision. By doing this, the anterior chamber will stay very stable. If we place the forceps very horizontally, then when we want to reach the anterior capsule, we'll need to push the forceps down, and with this, we'll be squeezing the viscoelastic from inside the eye. What happens, is that the anterior chamber will collapse in this situation, and when this happens, and we pull the flap that we have created, the rhexis will tend to go out towards the sonuli, which is something that we really need to avoid. So we imagine we have this case of a mature cataract stained with blue dye, and we have already created the flap. We imagine that we have the main incision somewhere here, right in front of where we want to create the flap. Once that we have done this, it's very important to know where to hold the flap from when it comes to pull it in the direction where we want to create the rhexis. In this case, it will be clockwise. So if we go to this flap, you need to consider that it will be safe for you to hold the flap as far as you stay somewhere here or here. If you do that, the force vectors that you will imply to the flap that is created will follow the direction of your forceps, which is this one in this case. Meanwhile, if you hold the flap somewhere here or here, the force vectors over the rhexis will create a force in this direction. And this is when the rhexis, instead of being following the direction of your forceps, it will really go out like that. In brief, what I want just to highlight is the areas where you should avoid holding the flap from, which are anywhere in this red area. You need to avoid those areas to hold the flap, and the safe area is right here. So here you'll see how I create the flap just in front and away from the main incision. Why? Because when I do this and I want to manipulate the flap that I have just created, this will allow me to have more movement with the flap, with the forceps, and it will be easier for me to move the flap in the direction that I want. Here we have the example of a trainee doing the creating a flap. This trainee is going to do the rhexis anti-clockwise. And as you see, the flap is being created just underneath the main incision. These will make extremely difficult to manipulate the flap, as you can see, because we need to alter the structure of the main incision to try to reach anything that is underneath it. And this will squeeze viscoelastic out. This will create wrinkles in the cornea, and the visibility that we'll have is worse. You see that after using the cystitome, the trainee goes back in with forceps, trying to hold the flap. It's really struggling with it, but you see that the visibility that you have there is super and very limited because of the position where the flap has been created. So that's something that you should always avoid also. And this goes in the line of what I was telling you just now. You create the flap far away from the main incision, and then you hold it close to the edge and you go underneath in one go only, as you see there. When you release the flap, you'll see that you have created this little fold in the flap there. You can see it right here. And this will make it very easy to hold the flap even though you're still close to the main incision as you see here. And then you can carry on and finish your rhexis. and this is a super important tip. So we have the rhexis that we are creating, curvilinear, round, and it's very important to know when to release the flap and re-hold it closer to the edge of the rhexis that we are creating. We need to think on the circle that we are creating and think on the central part of the circle, which could be somewhere here. So if we consider that, then we need to consider the radius that we are creating with the flap, which in this case, where I'm going to release it, is right here. If we do that, still, and we go back to the force vectors as I was explaining before, still there, we'll be following the direction that we want. But if we hold the flap somewhere beyond that center of the circle, imagine that I have the forceps here. So I'm holding the flap in this position, creating this radius here beyond the central part of the circle. The force that will be applying to the rhexis goes in this direction. And this is when the rhexis will follow this direction going outside. So let's go back to this rhexis. First, don't squeeze the main incision. Second, create a flap far away from the main incision. Third, remember where to hold the flap safely, as you can see right there. Fourth, go underneath the main incision in one go. Remember that doing so will have this little fold that we can hold to carry on. And remember and pay attention that I'm always releasing the flap before the radius that I'm creating with it goes beyond the central part of the circle that we are creating. And doing these steps, you will get always a perfect round rhexis.